Welcome to Fierce Queen's Reckoning. I'm glad you're here. Now let's get into the story. She was 7 months pregnant, standing in the middle of a wedding reception in Niagara-on-the-Lake, when her husband announced to a table of 40 guests that she had embarrassed him for the last time. Not quietly. Not in the hallway. At the head table, into a microphone he had picked up because he thought it was still live from the toasts. The band had just finished a set. The room was almost silent. His voice carried to every corner of the tent. Her name was Lynette O.C. Fosu. To her husband, to his family, to the entire curated social world she had inhabited for the past 5 years, she was simply Lynn, the steady one, the accountant who worked long hours and came home and cooked without being asked and managed the mortgage, and the school calendar for her stepson, and the quarterly taxes, and the household insurance renewals, and her husband's expense reports, which he submitted under his own name, to a firm that did not know she had been quietly doing half his administrative work for 3 years. What none of them knew, what she had spent 5 years and a very deliberate amount of careful distance concealing, was that Lynette O.C. Fosu was born Lynette Adeze O.C. Brempong, the only child of Kwame O.C. Brempong, the founder and silent majority shareholder of O.C. Capital Group, a private investment firm headquartered in Toronto with holdings in commercial real estate development, clean energy infrastructure, private equity, and a technology portfolio that had, in the last fiscal year alone, returned more than most mid-size pension funds. The Globe and Mail had attempted a profile of the family twice. Both times, Kwame had declined, rerouted the inquiry through a communications firm, and donated a building to a university hospital the following week to redirect attention. It worked both times. Lynette had grown up inside that wealth, the way you grow up inside weather. It surrounded everything. It bent every introduction, every smile, every extended hand in her direction toward itself, like a compass needle toward north. By the time she was 17, she could read the difference between someone interested in her and someone interested in the name within the length of a handshake. By 23, she had stopped expecting the ratio to improve. Her mother had died when she was 11. Pancreatic cancer, fast and total, the kind that gives you 4 months between diagnosis and goodbye. Lynette sat in the palliative care room at Mount Sinai for the last 2 weeks and watched the nurses come and go with a quiet, capable certainty that she found more comforting than anything a doctor said. They knew what to do with their hands. They knew which silences to fill and which to leave alone. She decided, in that room, that she wanted to be the kind of person who knew what to do. Not the kind who signed checks from a boardroom, the kind who showed up. She became a chartered accountant, not a fund manager, not a portfolio strategist, a forensic accountant, specifically, the kind organizations called when they needed someone to find what was hidden. She completed her designation at the University of Toronto under her mother's maiden name, which was Fosu. She passed her CFE on the first attempt. She joined a mid-size firm in Kitchener where nobody knew the O.C. Brempong name, because the O.C. Brempong family did not build condominiums with their name on the lobby or sponsor arena naming rights. They built things quietly, held them carefully, and preferred it that way. Lynette rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Waterloo. She drove a 5-year-old Subaru. She brought lunch from home 4 days a week and kept exactly 1 piece of jewelry on her at all times, a small gold ring on her right hand, set with a single dark green tourmaline that had belonged to her mother. It was worth in material terms, perhaps $800. In every other sense, it was worth considerably more. Her father called it the experiment. Kwame Osei Brempong was a man who communicated in precise sentences and long silences, and had understood, watching his daughter grow up, that she needed to be seen without the money in the room. He had watched his own relationships corrode under the pressure of it. He understood. He told her one thing before she moved to Waterloo. The most capable person at the table is often the one nobody is watching. Remember that. Let them underestimate you. It costs them more than it costs you. Lynette had carried that sentence into every room she entered since. She carried it into the firm where she worked 11-hour days. She carried it into the wine bar in Kitchener, where she met Graham Alderton on a Thursday evening, after she had just spent 6 hours untangling a client's fraudulent supplier invoices, and needed a glass of something cold and a chair that was not her desk. She carried it into the 5 years that followed, and she would carry it out the other side. Graham Alderton was a regional sales director at a mid-size pharmaceutical distribution company. He was presentable in the way of men who attended too many industry conferences, polished, rehearsed, comfortable filling a room with the sound of his own voice. He made good money. He believed he deserved better money. He spoke about his pipeline the way certain men speak about golf, with the tone of someone who expects you to be impressed and has never questioned whether you are. Lynette performed her usual assessment. The results were more ambiguous than she expected. Graham was charming, but it was not the calculated, transactional charm she had spent her 20s navigating. He asked about her work and listened to the answers. He remembered details. He showed up on time. He had a son from a previous relationship, 8 years old, thoughtful, anxious about new people, and he navigated co-parenting with a steadiness that she noted and filed away as evidence of something real. He did not Google her. He did not ask about her family. He could not have known there was anything to ask about. For 2 years, she watched him. She watched how he treated the server who got his order wrong. She watched how he handled a quarter where his numbers came in low. She watched how he spoke about his ex-wife when he did not know Lynette was paying attention. He was not remarkable, but he appeared, in the specific way that mattered most to her, honest. They married in year 3, a small ceremony at a vineyard outside of Stratford, Ontario. Lynette arranged everything. Graham contributed a heartfelt speech and a honeymoon location that was his mother's suggestion. She noted this and moved on. The marriage settled, within 18 months, into a pattern that Lynette recognized before she could name it. She managed the household, all of it. The mortgage, which she had structured and which she paid from her salary because the experiment required authenticity. The insurance renewals, the property taxes, the grocery orders, the meal planning, the vet appointments for their rescue cat, Biscuit, a 14-year-old tabby with hyperthyroidism, who required a daily pill that Graham had never learned to administer. The calendar for Graham's son, Oliver, who came every second week and needed his hockey schedule tracked, and his homework supervised, and his anxiety medications collected from the pharmacy when the prescription renewed. Graham managed nothing. He came home and ate the food and sat in the clean apartment and watched television and went to bed in a house that ran like a well-maintained machine and never once asked who was running it. Within 2 years, the pattern had calcified. Lynette built and maintained the infrastructure of their shared life. Graham moved through it, and the distance between what she contributed and what he acknowledged grew wider every month until it became a geography, hills and valleys and a river neither of them named. Graham did not notice the river because he was standing on a bridge Lynette had built. His mother's name was Ruth Ann Alderton. She had worked as an office administrator at a real estate brokerage in Burlington for 30 years and had retired with the opinions about household management, the proper role of a wife, and the limitations of women who were, in her assessment, too focused on their careers to be properly present. She visited often. She stayed for weekends. She communicated her assessments of Lynette's domestic performance in the specific, bloodless idiom of women who have learned to make cruelty sound like concern. "You work such long hours, Lynn. I just hope Graham isn't feeling neglected. Men need presence, not just productivity. This is a lovely dinner, though the chicken is just a touch dry." Lynette's chicken was not dry. Lynette's hours were long because she was untangling corporate fraud cases that protected pension holders and small businesses from being gutted. Lynette said neither of these things. She offered more wine. The exclusions followed the same architecture as the comments. Graham's family had a group chat that Lynette was not in. She discovered this because Oliver mentioned it once, casually. The way children reveal things they don't know are being kept from them. A cousin's engagement party was planned and attended without her. A Christmas gathering at Ruth Ann's house in Burlington was organized while Lynette was working a client deadline. And when she asked about it afterward, Graham said, simply and with mild impatience, "Mom just thought it would be less stressful without the extra company." Extra company. In 5 years of marriage, she absorbed the phrase and added it to a ledger she kept in the quiet, forensic part of her mind that none of them could see. Graham had a colleague named Trish Vanderhoven. She was a senior sales rep at a competing firm, early 30s, high energy, the kind of professional woman who occupied space loudly and considered it a form of confidence. She appeared in Graham's life the way certain disruptions appear, gradually, and then all at once. A name mentioned twice in passing, then a work event, then a number that appeared in his phone under a shortened version of a name Lynette did not recognize until she looked more carefully. She found out on a Tuesday evening in April. She was not looking. She was reconciling their joint expenses for the month, a task Graham had never once participated in. when she noticed 3 restaurant charges that did not correspond to any dinner she had been part of. She cross-referenced. The dates were evenings when Graham had told her he was at a client dinner in Hamilton, at a conference in London, Ontario, and at a team event in Mississauga. The amounts were for 2 people. One of the receipts had been forwarded to Graham's email from an open table confirmation. She had full access to the household email account because she had set it up and managed it. She sat very still for 45 seconds. Then she saved the confirmation to a folder she created in her personal cloud drive and labeled it with the date and moved on. Over the following 3 weeks, she assembled documentation the way she assembled evidence files for clients. Methodically. Without emotion. With the precision of someone who understood that the truth was not in the instinct, but in the paper trail. She found a hotel charge in Oakville. She found a pattern in his phone, a contact listed as Travis D., who never received texts in the daytime, but received them with regularity between 10 and 11 at night. She drove to the conference hotel in London on a Friday afternoon and watched Graham leave the lobby at 4:15 with Trish Vanderhoven, who was wearing a coral blazer and who got into his rental car and settled into it with the comfort of someone who had been there before. Lynette photographed the car. She photographed the parking garage timestamp. She drove back to Waterloo. She picked Oliver up from hockey. She made dinner. She helped Oliver with a social studies project about provincial governments. She gave Biscuit his pill. She put Oliver to bed. She did not cry. She did not confront Graham. She felt something settle inside her, the way a building settles when a load-bearing wall has been quietly assessed and found to be less structural than it appeared. The experiment was over. The data was definitive. She had hidden her identity and her resources to find a man who would see her clearly, and she had found a man who had never looked at all. Her father had told her to let them underestimate her. She was now going to demonstrate exactly what that cost. The wedding was Graham's cousin Petra's, Petra Alderton Fry, who was marrying a man named Devon Fry at a vineyard venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake at the end of June, in a wedding that the Alderton family had been planning around for 9 months. Lynette had addressed the envelopes, confirmed the dietary restrictions, and arranged the gift. She was 7 months pregnant, and the drive from Waterloo was 2 hours, and she had not slept well in 4 days, because the baby was pressing on her ribs and her pelvis simultaneously with what felt like deliberate coordination. She had asked Graham, 3 weeks before the wedding, whether they could leave the reception by 9. She was tired. She had a prenatal checkup the next morning. He had said yes. The evening proceeded normally until the toasts ended and the dancing began, and Trish Vanderhoven appeared at the edge of the venue wearing a yellow sundress and a composure that confirmed she had been invited, and that Lynette had not been told. She watched Graham's face when he saw Trish. She watched the timing. She understood immediately that this had been arranged. She sat with it for 40 minutes. She ate nothing. She felt the baby shift and press against her ribs. She watched Ruthann watch the dance floor where Graham had gone to stand near Trish. She watched Graham's sister, Chelsea, smirk into her champagne and check her phone. Then Ruthann leaned across the table and said, with the particular brightness of a woman delivering a line she had been rehearsing, "Lynn, sweetheart, you look absolutely exhausted. You should get some rest. We'll make sure Graham gets home. We'll make sure Graham gets home." As though he were a child who needed supervision. As though the woman in the yellow dress across the room was not the reason for any of it. As though Lynette had not driven 2 hours and spent the evening eating nothing and managing her own discomfort with the same steady competence with which she managed everything else in that family's life. Lynette set down her sparkling water. She picked up her bag. She stood. Graham followed her to the parking lot, not to apologize, to manage. He caught her at the car and said, in a low, controlled voice that was more instruction than concern, "Don't do this, Lynn. Not here. Not tonight." She turned to look at him. She did not raise her voice. She said, "I know exactly what tonight is, Graham. And I know exactly who Trish Vanderhoven is. And I know about the hotel in Oakville and the restaurant in Hamilton and the confirmation email from OpenTable that you forwarded to our household account." His face changed. She watched it change. She said, "I'm leaving now. You should stay. Enjoy the reception." He reached for her arm. She stepped back. He stepped forward and took hold of her wrist. Not violently, but firmly, with the grip of a man who was used to things going the way he had planned them, and said, "We are not doing this right now." She pulled free. She looked at him for 2 full seconds. Then she took out her phone and made a call. She sat in the car and waited. 7 minutes later, a black SUV pulled quietly into the far end of the parking lot. A woman in a dark jacket walked to Lynette's car, knocked softly, and opened the door. She said, "Miss Osi Brempong, your father sent us." "Are you safe?" Lynette said. "Yes, the baby is fine. Let's go." She left the car in the parking lot. She got into the SUV. The door closed. The SUV pulled out of the venue and onto the highway in the direction of Toronto. And the only thing it left behind was a tire mark on the gravel, and a man standing in a parking lot in Niagara-on-the-Lake, who did not yet understand what had just begun. She did not go to their apartment. She went to a property in the annex neighborhood of Toronto, a narrow Victorian row house she had purchased 4 years earlier through a numbered company. Fully furnished, fully staffed on call, in the way that people who have grown up around contingency planning always have a contingency. The lights were on when she arrived. The refrigerator was stocked. A physician from a private practice was waiting in the front room. Biscuit the cat had been collected from the apartment by a member of her father's household staff 3 hours before Lynette left for the wedding. Oliver had gone to his mother's that weekend. He was safe. He was not involved. This was the one thing she had ensured before anything else. The physician checked her over. The baby was fine. Lynette was bruised at the wrist. Her blood pressure was elevated. She was advised to rest. She thanked the physician and sat in an armchair facing the window and looked out at a street in Toronto in the early hours of the morning and felt the terrifying, lucid clarity of a woman who has spent 5 years being something smaller than she is and has just stopped. She called her father. Kwam Osi Brempong answered immediately. She said, "It's done. I need legal, forensic, and investigative. Full team. By morning," he said. "Already in motion. Are you safe?" "Yes." "And the baby?" "Fine." She heard him breathe. She heard in the silence behind that breath the sound of a man who had built a company from nothing in a country that had not made it easy, who had watched his wife die and raised his daughter alone and given her everything he had, including the space to test the world on her own terms, restraining everything he had the power to do. He said, "I'll be there for the morning. Don't contact him. Don't respond to anything," she said. "I know, Dad." She set the phone down. She placed both hands on her belly and felt the baby turn, slow and deliberate, like someone getting comfortable for a long wait. She did not sleep. She sat in the armchair and went through every file she had built in her mind and began to plan. By 9 the next morning, 4 things had happened. First, a legal team had filed an emergency protective order, supported by medical documentation from the private physician, a written account prepared by her father's security team, who had been positioned at the venue perimeter as standard protocol. They had been there all evening, unnoticed, because they were very good at being unnoticed, and time-stamped photographs from the parking lot. Graham was not to contact Lynette directly. All communication would be routed through counsel. A divorce petition was in preparation. Second, a forensic accounting team had begun a full review of Graham's financial position. This took 4 hours because Graham's finances were not complex. They were, however, significantly propped up. His salary covered his car, his golf membership, and his bar tabs. The mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the property tax installments, Oliver's hockey fees, Biscuit's veterinary bills, and 6 specific instances in which Lynette had made small transfers from a personal account linked to a family trust to cover gaps in Graham's cash flow when his commission cycle ran late. She had documentation for everyone. She had always kept documentation. It was her profession. It was, in a more fundamental way, her nature. Third, the OC Capital Group's real estate arm initiated a standard portfolio review of its Ontario commercial holdings. This review identified, among other assets, an office building in Hamilton where Graham's employer leased 2 floors. The building was held through a property management company that was a subsidiary of a trust. The trust's institutional co-investor was a fund administered by a firm whose senior partner had worked for the OC family for 21 years. Lynette did not own the building her husband's company worked in, but she was connected, through 3 precise layers of corporate structure, to the entity whose decisions about that lease could become extremely inconvenient. She did not reach for it. Not yet. Fourth, a private investigator confirmed what Lynette had already documented. The relationship with Trish Vanderhoven had been ongoing for 11 months. The investigator provided timestamps, locations, and a summary of 7 months of evidence that matched, almost exactly, the file Lynette had already built on her own. She read the report. She filed it. She waited for Graham to notice she was gone. It took him 9 hours. He had stayed at the reception. He had danced. He had driven back to Waterloo in the early morning and found the apartment dark, and Lynette's phone going to voicemail, and Biscuit absent from his usual place on the bed. Her maternity bag was gone. Her prenatal vitamins. A wool cardigan she wore most evenings. The surface of her desk had been cleared in the precise, deliberate way she cleared surfaces when she was done with something. He called 6 times. He called Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann said she'd probably gone to a friend's, that she was being dramatic, that she'd be back. Lynette did not come back. By noon, Graham received a call from a lawyer he didn't know informing him that his wife had filed for an emergency protection order and that direct contact was prohibited. He sat in the apartment for 2 hours doing nothing. Then he called his own lawyer. His lawyer called back that evening. Her voice was careful in the way lawyers' voices become careful when they have just read something that changes the shape of the conversation. She said, "Graham, she has documentation of every joint expense for the past 5 years, itemized and cross-referenced. She has the hotel records and the restaurant receipts, and she has photographs from the parking lot in Niagara on the lake, and she has a medical report. What I need to understand from you is, what exactly happened in that parking lot?" Graham sat at his own kitchen table in his own apartment and felt the floor move beneath him. Not dramatically, but precisely, the way a foundation moves when someone who understands load-bearing structures begins, quietly and without announcement, to remove the weight they have been carrying. The withdrawal was not theatrical. Lynette did not announce it. She simply stopped. Week 1. The mortgage auto payment failed. It was linked to Lynette's account. Graham did not know the lender's contact information. He did not know the account number. He did not have the login. He spent 4 hours making calls that did not reach the right people. He found a previous statement in a kitchen drawer and spent 40 minutes on hold and was told, eventually, that the payment was 7 days past due. Week 2. The insurance renewal on the apartment lapsed. Lynette had set up the auto renewal through her broker. Without her, the policy generated a notice and then a gap. Graham found the notice under a takeout container on the counter. Week 3. Oliver's hockey registration came due for the fall session. Graham did not know the name of the hockey association. He did not know the login for the registration portal. He did not know Oliver's jersey number or the name of the coach or the name of the arena where practices were held on Thursday evenings. He called Oliver's mother, who told him, with a flatness that indicated she had been expecting this call, what she knew. She did not know everything. Lynette had known everything. Week 3 also brought Biscuit's medication renewal. The prescription required a vet's authorization. Graham did not know the vet's name. He called the closest veterinary clinic to the apartment. They had no record of a cat named Biscuit. He called 2 more. On the 4th call, he reached the right practice, gave the wrong address, was told the prescription had already been transferred, and understood, slowly, that Lynette had thought of this before she left. She had thought of everything before she left. She always had. Week 4. Graham's company's Hamilton office lease came up for its annual review. The property management firm that handled the building sent a letter indicating that the renewal terms were under revision, pending a portfolio reassessment by the ownership group. The letter was polite. It was precise. It said nothing threatening. It also said nothing reassuring. Graham did not connect any of this to Lynette. How could he? She was an accountant at a mid-size firm in Kitchener. She drove a Subaru. She packed her own lunch. The idea that his wife had any relationship to the ownership architecture of his company's office building was so far outside the map of who he believed her to be that it could not even register as a possibility. Ruth Ann came to help. She arrived with her overnight bag and her opinions and stayed for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, she found the binder. Lynette had maintained a household management binder since the 2nd month of their marriage. It was organized by category, tabbed, with current account information, renewal dates, login credentials for every service, emergency contacts, Biscuit's medical history, Oliver's school and medical records, the name and number of every tradesperson she had ever called for the apartment, and a 12-month calendar of recurring tasks. Ruth Ann found it in the 2nd kitchen drawer from the left, where it had always been, in the position where it had always been, exactly where anyone who had ever been interested in the running of that household would have known to look. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she opened it. She called Chelsea. She said, in a voice Chelsea would describe later as different from any voice she had heard from her mother in 64 years. She ran everything, Chels. I mean everything. Every single account, every policy, every appointment. I didn't realize. I never thought to realize. Chelsea said, she was always a bit much, Mom. Very organized, kind of controlling. Ruth Ann said, she wasn't controlling. She was the only functioning adult in this arrangement, and I spent 5 years making her feel like a burden. It was the most accurate sentence Ruth Ann Alderton had ever produced about her daughter-in-law. It arrived when it was no longer possible for it to matter in the way she would have wished. Trish Vanderhoven lasted 6 weeks after Lynette left. She had been drawn to Graham Alderton as he appeared from the outside. The man with the clean apartment and the organized life and the easy dinner parties and the smoothly running schedule that made him seem, at a remove, like someone who had things handled. She had looked at his life and read capability. She had been reading Lynette's engineering and mistaking it for Graham's character. What she found, stripped of that engineering, was a man who ate crackers and deli cheese for dinner 4 nights running, who had a stack of unopened mail on the counter that included 2 utility notices, who did not know his own lease renewal date, and who called her on a Tuesday at 11 at night to ask if she knew how you were supposed to give a cat a pill. She did the arithmetic. The arithmetic resolved very simply. She sent a brief text and did not follow up. Graham sat in the apartment that evening with a glass of whiskey he'd poured too much of and a hockey game he wasn't watching and understood, in the specific sickening way of a man arriving late to an obvious conclusion, that the life Trish had been attracted to was not his life. It had been his wife's life, and his wife had taken it with her when she left, the way a skilled contractor takes their tools. The gala was Ruth Ann's idea. 4 months after the separation, still entirely unaware of Lynette's actual identity, Ruth Ann had organized a fundraising dinner for the Children's Hospital where Lynette had, in the past, volunteered during tax season as a pro bono financial advisor to families navigating disability claims. It was not a complicated motive. Ruth Ann wanted to rehabilitate the Alderton family's image in the social circles that mattered to her, and she had identified the Children's Hospital as the most legible vehicle for doing so. She booked the grand ballroom at a hotel in downtown Toronto. She printed programs. She engaged a catering team and a florist and sent invitations to 230 people. The event's principal donor had been coordinated through the hospital's development office and confirmed as a representative of the O.C. Brempong Family Foundation. Ruth Ann did not recognize the name. Why would she? The O.C. Brempong family did not sponsor arena naming rights or appear on donor walls. They funded things that mattered quietly, without ornamentation, and preferred their philanthropy to operate in the same register as their business, effective, durable, and unannounced. At 8:15, the ballroom doors opened, and Lynette Osifosu walked in. She had given birth 6 weeks earlier, a boy, 8 pounds and 2 ounces, healthy, alert, already regarding the world with an expression of focused assessment that Lynette recognized as her own. She had named him after her mother's father. She did not look like the woman they remembered. The exhaustion was gone, the careful smallness was gone, the quiet, accommodating posture of a woman who had spent 5 years making herself easier to overlook. Gone. She wore a deep green dress, silk wool, the kind of garment whose quality announces itself only to people who know what to look for. The tourmaline ring was on her right hand. Her posture was the posture of a woman walking into a room she has already assessed and found manageable. She walked directly to the head table without looking left or right. Ruth Ann saw her first. Ruth Ann's face moved through surprise, confusion, a deeper confusion, and then something that was not quite recognition but was the first stage of it. The understanding that something had shifted in a way she did not yet have the vocabulary to name. Graham saw her next. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He looked at Lynette. He looked at the program in his hand, where the words O.C. Brempong Family Foundation were printed in gold text, alongside a description of the foundation's 40-year history and its current annual giving total, which was a number that did not resolve easily in Graham's mind against the image of his wife eating a packed lunch at her desk in Kitchener. Lynette sat down. She did not greet Graham. She did not greet Ruth Ann. She picked up the program, read it, and set it down. The hospital's development director approached the microphone and introduced the evening's featured donor. She read from a prepared statement. The O.C. Brempong Family Foundation, a private philanthropic trust established in 1994, one of the largest family foundations in the country. Its newly appointed executive director, taking over from her father, Kwame O.C. Brempong, who is stepping back from day-to-day foundation operations this year, Lynette Adeze O.C. Brempong. The room applauded. Graham did not move. Ruth Ann's hands were in her lap. Lynette stood. She walked to the podium. She looked out at the room. She spoke for 5 minutes. She spoke about the hospital's pediatric ward. She spoke about the families who navigated illness without financial cushion. Families who missed work, who fell behind on rent, who could not access the legal and financial guidance they needed during some of the hardest periods of their lives. She spoke about invisible competence, the people who hold systems together without recognition, who are called difficult when they ask to be seen, who are called controlling when the word should be capable. She spoke about what it means to be genuinely useful, as opposed to decorative. She did not say Graham's name. She did not say Ruth Ann's name. She did not need to. She returned to her seat. She picked up her water glass. Graham leaned toward her. His voice was barely there. He said, "Lynn, I didn't know. I had no idea who you were. I swear to you." She looked at him. She held his gaze for long enough to be completely clear. She said, "I know you didn't know, Graham. That is not a defense. It is the indictment. I was your wife for 5 years. I was pregnant with your son, and you never once asked a meaningful question about who I was, what I came from, what I was capable of. You didn't know because you weren't curious, and now you are sitting beside me at a table with my family's name on the program, and the best thing you can find to say is that you didn't know." She paused. "I have already started to forgive you," she said. "That process has nothing to do with you." She turned back to the room. She did not look at Graham again. He sat beside her for another 2 hours, while his business contacts congratulated Lynette on the foundation's gift to the hospital, while the people who had known him professionally for years spoke to his wife with a warmth that had nothing to do with him, while his mother sat with her hands in her lap and said very little for the first time in Graham's memory. The weeks after the gala did not improve for Graham. The Hamilton lease review resolved with a rent increase, not punitive, precisely market rate, the kind of increase that an organization with a stable financial base absorbs without incident, and that an organization running on thin margins cannot. Graham's company absorbed it badly. His own commission structure was restructured shortly after. His position was not eliminated. It was reduced in scope and in compensation, in the way that companies restructure positions when a person's value has been reassessed. Ruth Ann sent a card. It was 3 paragraphs long. It contained the word "sorry" twice, the words "I realize now" 4 times, and a request to meet Lynette's son. The card showed no evidence of specific understanding of specific harm. It showed evidence of someone who understood that a relationship had been damaged and wanted to know whether the damage could be reversed, without a detailed accounting of what had caused it. Lynette read the card. She set it on the desk. She did not respond immediately. She wrote a note on her calendar for 3 months from now. Revisit. She would decide then whether the conversation was worth having, and on what terms. Chelsea sent a text that said, "Hey, hope you and the baby are well. I'd love to talk sometime. I feel like things got really messy, and I'd like to explain." Lynette read it on a Thursday morning while feeding her son. She thought about the word explain. She thought about the phrase "a little machine." She thought about 5 years of Christmas dinners and family weekends and gatherings where she had arrived with food she made and left with nothing she was given. She set the phone down and finished the feeding and went on with her day. Chelsea could send a formal request through the Foundation's community partner intake form. That was what the form was for. Graham called once, routed through his lawyer. He wanted to discuss the possibility of co-parenting arrangements, and separately, whether there was any possibility of. The message used the word reconciliation. Lynette was in the row house garden in the annex when she heard this. It was a September morning. Her son was asleep in a carrier against her chest. The tourmaline ring caught the light. A neighbor's maple had already started turning. Her father was inside making coffee, badly, in the way he always had, because Kwame Ose Brempong had never pretended to be someone who could make good coffee, and considered this an honest position. She said to her lawyer, "Tell him the co-parenting framework is already in the separation agreement. Tell him it will be fair. Tell him that regarding the other thing, I've already forgiven him. And tell him that forgiveness is not an invitation. She had a new life. It had the same bones as the old one, the same ring, the same cat, the same fundamental competence she had been exercising all along, only now with walls that belonged to her, and windows she had chosen herself. The experiment was over. Its conclusion had not been what she hoped for. But in the ruin of what she had hoped for, she had found what she had always actually been. Not the quiet wife of a regional sales director, not the steady one, not the woman who ran things in the background so other people could take the credit. She was Lynette Adeze Ose Brempong. She had always known what to do with her hands. And she had always known, in the part of herself she had been careful never to show them, that the room they were all standing in was one she had built. She looked down at her son. He was awake now, regarding the maple tree with complete grave attention, the way he regarded most things. She thought, I'll tell you when you're older. I'll tell you that your grandmother was the kind of woman who walked into rooms and understood their load-bearing structure and never asked for credit. And I'll tell you that that is not a tragedy. That... She held him a little tighter. The maple dropped a leaf. Somewhere in the house, her father produced a cup of coffee that was probably terrible and that she would drink without complaint, because some things matter more than whether the coffee is right. She was free. Not from difficulty. Difficulty was still present and would be present in the ways that difficulty is always present in a life of genuine stakes. But free of the test, free of the mask, free of the particular exhaustion of being seen only as what you were willing to carry for someone else. The quietest woman in the room is not always the weakest, her father had told her. Sometimes she is the reason the room is still standing. Lynette had been that reason for 5 years, and now she was done holding up a structure that had never deserved her. She had taken her tools, she had walked out, and the building had done what unsupported buildings do. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you've carried, or something you're ready to set down, subscribe and turn on notifications. We share stories for the women who build in silence. The next one is already waiting.